Hello, and welcome to FinTech Impact. I'm your host, Jason Pereira. Today on the show, we have a return guest, Parham Nasseri, president of InvestorCOM. InvestorCOM is a company that effectively merges the concepts of data and compliance into compliance tools for firms across North America. And with that, here's my interview with Parham. Parham, thanks for taking the time today.
Great to be here, Jason.
So, Parham Nasseri of InvestorCOM, remind everybody about what InvestorCOM is and what they do.
Sure thing. Across the regulatory obligations of wealth managers and asset managers, InvestorCom has viewed that their regulatory obligation is an opportunity to help them not only comply with their requirements, but help them grow their practice. So you look across Canada, the United States, there are parallel requirements around what the advisor's practices are around giving advice. We've looked at those and said, can we leverage these compliance requirements to help build their book of business and comply? So that's our why. At the end of the day, the purpose of today's conversation is to share with you some of our insights around how firms, our clients, have benefited from adopting a tech-first strategy as it relates to those requirements.
Okay. So I have many thoughts on this topic, but let's just jump into a couple of them. First off, bringing compliant process to your everyday workflow. Frankly, like most advisors lack workflow, let alone compliant workflow. What people seem to not understand sometimes is that you can absolutely check the box on all best-in-class, evidence-based ways of serving your client and do so in a way that is both empowering because now you have a workflow. Actually, more than both, a couple of things. Empowering because you have a workflow, demonstrates value, and also protects you. All three of those things. And lastly, results in better client outcome if you take that all seriously. So I am right with you on all of this as being an empowerment, and regulation can often lead us to a better world, even though many people don't like it simply because they don't like to be told what to do. People can feel free to argue with me online about all they want, but let's go. So let's just go a little, wind the clock for the audience a little bit back to the two big regulatory changes on Reg BI and CFR in Canada and the US. And let's talk how there were catalysts for change and how you enable that change.
Absolutely. So at the heart of it, in the simplest way you look at it, the requirement said, hey, if you're going to provide that financial advice to an investor around their life savings, you have to act in their best interest. And quite honestly, it's slightly on the comical side that this is a regulatory requirement, to your point, but it is. And so there are some specific, I'll call it, requirements for the advisors and the firms who are in this business of providing financial advice to adhere to. And what we've done is we've looked at those requirements and said, hey, if this is a consistent obligation across the board for financial professionals, can we look at that differently and to try to not just check the boxes, but build trust with the investor, improve the end outcome? And that's effectively what's led to not just immediate, but long-term success for our clients. And so let's get into the details a little bit around this, Jason.
Well, let's just also say here, there's a difference between the concept of checking the box, and this is the problem. It's often used as a argument towards, oh, this is a pointless exercise. What matters is the work that goes into checking the box. You can do something poorly, you can do something well. And if you check that box in the best possible way possible, then it's something that, like I said, hits the Venn diagram of better client outcome, better business outcome, and compliant.
Exactly. That's at the heart of exactly what we're trying to do. And quite frankly, our company's why. So let's take a few examples. In Canada, as an example, there's a requirement of getting to know your client. There's specific questions. You have to know their risk tolerance, risk capacity. Then you have to educate yourself on the product. And then as part of making suitable recommendations that are in the end investor's best interest, you have to consider a range of reasonable alternatives.
Which makes sense because at the end of the day, if you can't be a man with a hammer and all you know is a nail, where do you show that you did the due diligence to prove that what you're recommending makes sense?
Exactly. Now, and this is why you mentioned, I'm a repeat guest on your podcast. The last time we were together, we were talking about the theory of what's the basis for these requirements. And I think 5 years into this journey, almost 5, depending on which way you look at it, we should be past the why behind this and talk about what are the best practices from an implementation perspective. what we've observed is when clients take that requirement seriously and they adopt digital solutions, that's one category of clients. There are others who've gone and perhaps maybe going to put themselves in their heads into the sand. And then there's others who've taken a forms-based, manual forms as a way to mitigate these risks. And perhaps to your point, it just effectively becomes check the box because we've told you to check the box, right? That's
Also, like,
years away from the Venn diagram that you talked about.
yeah, but also then becomes the problem is it becomes the thing that people hate and the thing that makes no sense and why people push back on it, right? Or I always like to pick on absolute nonsense risk tolerance questionnaires that are made up by back offices to check the box as opposed to using something that's actually proven in science, right? I get people's apathy when they're being sent on a fool's errand. So unfortunately, but that also, but then that leads people to believe, or at least advisors to believe that the entire concept is a fool's errand when it can actually be empowering.
You got to get to know your client at the time of the recommendation on a periodic basis, to get to know the products at the time, especially in an industry that's filled with jargon and new data points and analysis paralysis, to be able to streamline that across the paradigm of cost, risk, and return for the end investor, for the end advisor. I think it aligns. We are seeing the results of what happens when you align those for everybody that's involved in that value chain. And the punchline really is keeping it intuitive and simple. We have a company value around proudly simple, and we foundationally believe it. You know this, Jason, better than anybody. You're well versed in all of the data points, all of the different analysis paralysis data points that are available out there. Ultimately, it comes down to, hey, compared to the other range of reasonable alternatives, how does this solution that I'm recommending my investor compare across cost, risk, and return, considering the investor's return objectives? To be able to do that really quickly and simply and intuitively and generate a proposal to the end investor, what we're seeing is it foundationally improves outcomes and it helps our clients win business at the end of the day. Now, the best way to illustrate this is, can a manual form do that? What we've seen in Canada specifically is a slew of firms jumping to the drawing table and manufacturing these fillable PDF forms that are perhaps 7 pages long. And I put myself in the advisor's shoes, Jason. I would leave the industry. If you told me every time I'm recommending a product, I have to fill out 7-page form around, you know,
We've seen that. We've seen advisors leave industries for when regulation goes too far, right? We've seen it with Australia, right? Now we could argue you saw that with, and when you strike the right balance, you have some leave and then a bunch come back like we saw with the UK.
Exactly. And I think you're looking across Canada and the US, not entirely similar environments, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But when that requirement is looked at in a little bit more of a positive light and looked at as an opportunity, the results are foundationally different.
Absolutely. The reality is you look at how most of this industry works, which is leaving people their own devices, advisors, do whatever you want. And there's no structures. The industry creates its own compliance nightmare through lack of uniformity. And what I mean by uniformity is not everybody going into one cookie cutter thing. It's lack of streamline of actual proper systems for understanding product and client and bringing those together. It's not hard.
In every industry, what's interesting about the advice business specifically is those foundational principles of getting to know one's client, getting to know the product, and aligning the two to advance the investor's outcomes. It's a bit more prominent because you're dealing with people's life savings. And I go back to where the industry's going, where the successful advisors going, and firms. And I look at folks like you, Jason, in your practice. If you're not technology first, how are you going to compete over the long term, especially given where AI is going, and how much efficiencies can be built into the system to improve the end outcomes for the end investors. And that's one of the things that I think it's important to talk about today, Jason, because there is regulatory requirements, and then there is the outcomes of how firms have responded to those. As I mentioned, across the chasm, there are the late adopters of tech who are using paper and pen. And for those folks to evolve to a AI-based environment, you're foundationally talking about supervising your advisors through filing cabinets. That's just going to be a lot more difficult for folks to compete long-term. What if you had applications and solutions that would correct compliance challenges on a just-in-time basis as they were happening. And to get there, you need to have appropriate software solutions and data foundationally to allow you to leapfrog into the AI world. Without that, the challenge is, how are you going to build a systematic process that where call recording with your investor around advice can be tabulated into a systematic process around getting to know your client, getting to know your product, and making sure those recommendations consider alternatives. That in our respective view, where the industry is going with the advent of AI requires this step-by-step path where firms can take a look at their analog processes and say, can we digitize them as a second step and then jump into the AI world? And that's effectively where we're going to go as a company as well and provide those solutions to our clients.
Look, you're absolutely right. As someone who's playing around quite heavily in this world and even legitimately currently working on a more than 50-person agentic framework for running his business, the reality is that it all relies on data. And if you think you're going to push paper around in this new world, it's a matter of time before you get steamrolled on this, because frankly, your costs are just going to stay crazy high compared to everybody else. Anyway, let's leave that aside. All right, let's talk about what you've seen. So we have challenges here with basically people adopting this. The ones who've embraced it, talk to me about the results that they've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. So the specific case study I want to go to is what we're seeing across our US clients. The requirements there are a little bit more stringent and a bit more heavily enforced. And so
The regulator actually enforces them. Continue.
The data around what we see across our applications are a bit more formidable. Under regulation best interest in the US, if someone's going to provide advice around moving accounts, specifically from 401ks, similar to what a defined contribution pension plan is, into a RRSP or a LIRA in Canada, that advice is perceived to be, the magnitude of that advice is supposed to be one of the biggest financial decisions majority of Americans make. In fact, majority of the life savings is in that pocket of employer-sponsored plans. And so when an advisor provides advice around that, the level of scrutiny is fairly elevated. What we've seen, Jason, is when firms are able to look at this in a digital first manner, the level of not just compliance moat that they're able to build around their practice, but once it's digitized, then advisors can actually build confidence in the type of advice that they're building and see how much more assets that they can gather over time in a sustainable manner. Now, you compare that how people's assets are cared for in a defined contribution plan, in an employer-sponsored plan, and is that the right thing for everybody? If I'm acting in my investor's best interest, are they actually cared for better if I actually have an advisor's degree of care over those assets versus them being in some target date fund between now and eating up fees for the formidable future? And so what we've seen is over time, as these advisors adopt these applications and build confidence around them and see the efficiencies in providing that level of advice, the results are remarkable. This segment of the industry, specifically in the US, and I'm surprised none of it has actually come to the...
Well, you're talking about retirement plans. In the US, they actually have regulation around with ERISA. In Canada, we got guidelines no one listens to, but continue.
That's the ultimate question. I've seen, having worked on the regulatory side, Jason, there are challenges around that level of advice being provided to end investors. And quite honestly, there is a question outstanding in my mind around why is this not the same type of advice is being provided? Why is it not being highlighted by regulators? Why is it not being talked about in Canada? Because the level of scrutiny we're seeing across our clients going through exams, that requires a consistent process that, quite honestly, forms are never going to be able to solve at the end of the day.
Frustrating. So, all right. So we've touched upon the major areas we want to talk about. So let's reframe here. So you guys enable compliant workflow, which also allows advisors to flourish, and also, I think, effectively demonstrate competency, value, and care. Makes perfect sense. Versus the classic, what you love competing with, which is always terrible to see, though. Client shows up and the advisor has a 5-minute conversation and pulls out the solution out of their briefcase, the magic briefcase that knows everything about the client they never met, which is always amusing. So you do that. Talk to me about let's go back to the AI aspect of this, right? We talked about the data aspect. How is your company adapting to the AI world?
Yeah. So where we find success currently in our applications is they're designed to be intuitive and simple at the end of the day. The second, and it's a slight nuance and it's an important nuance. I have to articulate this properly. Software can do anything you require. And it's really easy, especially in the complexities of the investment industry, to get lost in the weeds of having 10,000 data points, analyze clients' portfolios 800 different ways. But foundationally, all the investors care about is, hey, do I trust my advisor? Are they acting in my best interest? And do I have something to look at that helps me get there? So our software today, the reason for behind its success is taking the complexities of these regulatory requirements and making them intuitive and easy to comply with. Now, that's step one. Step two, fast forward to where we want to go as an AI first organization, is to be able to augment those applications with a simple conversation Jason would have with his clients. So why can you not take a call recording or a just-in-time conversation with an end investor around advice that's being provided to complete the assessments from a compliance perspective? So where we're going is taking those voice conversations, pre-populating our forms, our applications with the conversations that are happening to be able to apply the compliance requirements in an ambient, just-in-time manner. That's the vision of our AI future. And quite honestly, our clients are eating it up because now you compare the analog world of filling out forms to the efficiencies of a digital application that's got market data in it, so on and so forth, to where you can take conversation around the advice that's provided and pre-fill those forms and the documentation that needs to be provided to the end investor. Everybody wins. It becomes a significantly less degree of weight on everybody involved in that value chain.
Agreed. And that's the note takers in the US have taken. It's funny. I still find it funny that most advisors in this country don't seem to understand that advisor notation software is a thing. But in the US, it's reached over 40% market share in literally 2 years, which is unprecedented of any software in its category. And for a very good reason, because not only is it doing the kind of Trojan horse on this was that, yes, congratulations, let the horse in, it's going to record all your stuff. It's the population of downstream workflow that's immensely powerful.
There is, I think you look at where we are seeing, to your point, adoption of AI note takers in the US. I wish you could see the similar type of trend in Canada, but that's a separate topic for another day. But I do think you go back to that note-taking function and you think about the compliance requirements around getting to know your client, around getting to know your product and making suitable recommendations or best interest recommendations. That process can be significantly improved by way of those note takers, right? Instead of having to have that conversation with your end investor and then come back to your desk or just in time, manually fill out information, that process can significantly be saved from a time perspective with the advent of AI and taking a voice conversation. Now, there is an important observation, Jason, that we've come across. And I want to go to the US more specifically, because under the prior administration, there was this tangible, categorical allergy to AI applications because of the potential conflicts that they might have. Over the past, I want to say even 8 months, that's shifted quite a bit to
No choice.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Around the time that the Cloud 3.5 dropped, what a shock, right? So suddenly, yes, especially with all the vibe coding going on. So no surprise that this is changing rapidly.
And our clients are coming to the table a lot more willing to look at some of the risks of AI and look to mitigate them versus entirely avoidance and putting your head in the sand and saying, hey, this AI wave is just a risk. And quite honestly, I'm going to age myself to some degree. The same narrative was in place when cloud computing was in place. Oh, you want to put your documents in the cloud? some are going to be risking access to information, and there's going to be the Pentagon that can, reach over and look
Oh
at
boy,
those.
the old Canadian jurisdictional data myth that doesn't exist that makes me lose my mind on a regular basis.
So you read Crossing the Chasm, however you want to pronounce it, it's the same that's taking place. And in my opinion, I think the capabilities and the advent of AI is that much more profound in our industry, where clients value simplicity, advisors value simplicity, and taking complexities out of the process through intuitive design. And so that's where we believe there's going to be even more success for forward-thinking firms and advisors who are looking at this question and saying, hey, how can I continue to improve my practice? I know I'm not going to be replaced. I know my client trusts my advice. And foundationally, the entire financial industry is about that element to trust, and it can be augmented with AI.
Absolutely. All right. So we've gone on a rant. Let's circle this back to the close. So basically, three questions I asked are on a kind of a positive, and we'll see if it's a positive note this time. If you had one wish for something to change in your company or the industry as a whole, what would it be?
I'm always perplexed by the aversion to change. In my 20 plus year career, there are elements of change in AI, in software, in regulatory change that are positive. Is it difficult to embrace that change? Is it difficult to fully put one's arms around that element of change? Yes. But I've seen more folks spend their energy and resources on resisting that change versus embracing it and saying, how can this element of change be an inflection point in the company or in the group's strategic future? So that's one hope I would have for our industry.
Yeah, I would, as someone who likes to play on the cutting edge, I get it. As humans, our brains are hardwired to resist change. We're survivalists and change means threat in most people's mindsets. But frankly, the reality is just that good luck to you. I say this all the time. You don't conduct your business the way you did 10 years ago. You changed, right? You may have kicked and screamed and done all kinds of things to get there. But if you're conducting your business the exact same way you did 10 years ago, guaranteed someone who's got a similar business to yours is now more profitable and growing faster and servicing people better. So the reality is, yes, you either continue to evolve or you slowly die off because that's just the way of the world. Nothing stays the same. The world is a constant state of change. Anyway, second question. What's been the biggest challenge in getting your company to where it is today?
Oh, wow. I think InvestorCOM circumstances are somebody has got to do a business case, like an IV case study on this. And I'll say this quite confidently, having gone through a significant level of change. InvestorCOM, if you look at its 32, 33-year history, started out as a print and outsource fulfillment business. What that meant was you talk about tax confirmations, account statements, prospectuses being delivered to end investors. We would be a services business that was responsible for taking those requirements and delivering those regulatory documents to end investors. To transition to a full-fledged AI-enabled software company requires a significant tolerance of change. And quite honestly, we've had to divest parts of the business that's not been strategic for us. And whoever runs a business, I always say this, letting go of revenue, when you have blue chip clients who are relying on your services and you say, hey, this may not be strategic for our go forward future, it's challenging. It's incredibly difficult. And so
Yes, continue. I'm going to get some thoughts.
So having seen our organization, the group of people, our cohort at InvestorCOM embrace that change to where we are today, Jason, and I'll give you some minor examples. Today, our ability to formulate change in our software solutions is tangibly different, tangibly improved by way of adopting AI across our organization. You talked about November and Claude 3.5. Guess what? Our entire team is on Claude and other AI applications across marketing to development. And that, I believe our ability to commit to that change is significantly better than some of the larger organizations who are lost in red tape and bureaucratic process. And quite honestly, that becomes a competitive advantage. And so where we are today gives me so much more hope around what we can do for our clients longer term. Hey, do you want to change your process this way or that way? You want to voice enable your KYC, KYP process? Let's talk. Let's get that show on the road.
Yep. So I will say this much because I've had this discussion with advisors and other businesses. Yes, it's hard to give up revenue, but 80/20 rule. The reality is that oftentimes the burden of that revenue, what it imposes on your business, is actually net detrimental and you're more profitable without it. And beyond that, especially when it's a line of business you're not basically committed to. Think about what that does to your business reputation and mentality, right? There's more than one company keeping a software that I would refer to, a legacy software that I would refer to as a zombie software going in this country or others, simply because you know what? There's enough revenue to justify keeping a couple of devs on this, even though it's clunky and terrible and it's not really servicing our long-term needs, but the money's good, right? And it just dies off slowly over time and people become more frustrated with it and it just looks poorly on your company, right? And especially when you're not Microsoft, you're not Amazon, you can't afford to have those things, right? If anything, those resources might be better off selling that off to someone who cares or basically just shelving the entire thing because frankly, even just selling up the client list, because frankly, you're not doing any favors other than the people who are too stubborn to change them off of your platform in the first place.
Exactly right. Technology requires, if everyone thinks you build a code and off to the races and let's go. It's so different. Code requires constant TLC, constant development change. And that's why it's called software as a service, right? So that's a key theme. Anyways, I don't want to.
Yep. And I will say this is where in all my talking on vibe coding, this is where I think people are getting it wrong. I even got into an argument with someone from a major bank on LinkedIn who should know better because he apparently works on the tech team where this guy was thinking they could replace a bunch of deterministic, very complex softwares thinking they weren't that hard. And it's just, I'm sorry, no bank has ever made a world-class product everywhere. And you're telling me that someone who can't even get a bank that can't even get my consumer portal to look good because I click on something and it goes to the old portal experience, goes to the new portal experience. You're telling me that you're going to simultaneously maintain several dozen software mini companies within you to maintain these softwares? It's not, yes, I can create something that works today, but as you said, it's continuous improvement and continuous maintenance that matters.
It's that point, Jason, I think it requires a double click. Just bear with me. I think if you look at where the large financial institutions can optimize and lean into looking into the future is to manage other people's best in class software and be a portfolio co of all these different tech stacks that specialize in what they do. If these FIs, in my opinion, try to build their own best in class, the whole concept of building good software and maintaining good software. And I can't say enough about maintaining good software. That's the punchline. That's the hardest thing to do in the software business, to continue to grow and evolve software. Now, are you able to do that as a banking institution, as an investment institution long-term? Maybe. I just question, which business are you in?
So agreed. And I think that all the conversations I'm seeing now, the pendulum on buy versus build has swung so far to the build side that these people are going to spend the next 24 months burning a bunch of shareholder capital and ending up with nothing to show for it. And don't get me wrong, there are certain solutions that may not exist in the marketplace, that may not actually fit their business profile, that may not just do the thing they need to do on small stakes, right? Can they grease the wheels between divisions in a way that maybe another platform couldn't do and piggyback off, hey, we have Salesforce installed, we can piggyback off that data and make it go A, B, C, D to this thing that there's nothing in the marketplace and specific to us. Can they do that? Yes. Is it worth standing that up? Maybe. Should they do that with like other softwares where literally there's massive businesses built around maintaining these things? It's not just about viewing data, it's about complex calculation. The answer is absolutely not.
The best example is today with Claude, you can probably stand up a database and build a CRM, your own custom CRM, right?
Oh, dear God, don't.
See what I mean? Anything's possible now, but are you going to start building your own CRM versus buy best in class? They'll be responsible. And the amount of time and energy that goes into maintaining that damn thing.
Yes. Or it doesn't have to be best in class, right? If you have enough internal resources, right? And saying major institutions, you're going to have to be on Salesforce, end of story, call it a day. Don't even fight me on this. Okay. But in theory, can you get a specific player that especially if you have your data game, especially if you have a data lake going on, you got to the point where you got to decide we can steward that. Great. That's the case. Can you basically tie into a secondary CRM that still has a good company backing it, that does all the CRM-y things,
Like, yeah,
while simultaneously saying, okay, great, it's going to take care of that. I'm going to build the Go console, the to-do console in my business to make workflows happen and work in relation with the CRM to make that happen. Can you do something like that? Yes. The question is, should you, right? And of course, when you're not a major enterprise, you can have multiple devs, multiple Salesforce devs internally. That actually might be the better option. Who knows, right? But the argument at this point has just gotten to the pure point of absurdity, where it's just, oh, we just need your data. We don't need any of your software. You're going to maintain that software? Are you out of your mind? Again, name a single piece of bank-built software ever that was world-class.
Yeah.
At best, it's fine. At best. Anyway, and last question for you is, what keeps you getting out of bed in the morning to keep on fighting a good fight?
Oh God, I love your questions, Jason. I really think about the amount of fun I'm having, Jason, at InvestorCOM. And you have to have a little bit of a chip on your shoulder, if I could call it that, to be able to say, let's go up against the behemoths in the industry, the Broadridges, the Morningstars of the world, for no other reason than being competitive and helping improve our clients' outcomes at the end of the day across some of these requirements. And the results that we're seeing that I shared earlier make this a true joy. And I don't want to sound like a complete wonk, but the thesis was, can we automate some of these regulatory requirements for our clients and our end advisors? And the results we're seeing, and the team we've built around it at InvestorCOM has been a freaking phenomenal. I really mean it. Somebody should write a business case on the transformation of the business and where we are and where we're headed. So I'm excited. I think there's plenty more work to do, and the thesis has proven to work. And so it's just a matter of keep building from here on.
Parham, thank you very much for taking the time. I'm sure at some point we'll have to meet for a drink and drown our sorrows over the frustration over the current existence of the current state of things in Canada. But until then, thank you.
Thank you. This is fantastic. Appreciate your time, Jason. Thank you for having me on.
So that was Parham Nasseri and I basically airing our grievances in real time. If you enjoyed that podcast and you are looking to better your compliance workflow and actually build something that's not just compliant, but actually beneficial to your business, make sure to check out InvestorCOM. As always, if you enjoyed this podcast, please leave a review on Apple Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spotify, or visit your podcast. And until then, take care.
This podcast was brought to you by Woodgate Financial, an award-winning financial planning firm catering to high net worth individuals and their families. To learn more, go to woodgate.com. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play, or find more episodes at jasonpereira.ca.